church. We want a relationship with God, not tools and rules. Tools, not rules, something like that, right?
Yeah,
we kind of changed it. So, Scott, it's a joy to have you on coverage.
All right, so yeah, we kind of, Father Tom and I kind of changed the title a couple weeks ago, so it's a little mixed up in the bulletin. So yeah, the title is Orthodoxy, a Healing Vocation. So Father Tom's been talking at Raising Lazarus Project and also on Sundays about not just having it be about theology and kind of heady concepts, but bringing it down to our daily lives and practice. So with that in mind, I was thinking about just kind of my own work and how being Orthodox plays into that, and how what different concepts come into play in just my daily work. So in Orthodoxy, one of the things I loved when I was in the process of converting is that when they talk about theology, it's not this just heady thing that intellectuals do. The people, the saints that the church commemorates as theologians are not those who use their intellect mainly, but it speak from the heart. It's those that you'd expect poems from, and it's a language that doesn't really jive with the more heady theological side. So let's see. Also in converting, one thing that really kind of blew me away. I had never really taken a class on systematic theology, so I didn't really know what it was at the time. But as I started to study one concept, it was fascinating how all sorts of other things, so theosis was the first one that kind of just blew me away. As I started getting into that, I realized that changed salvation and sin, and all these categories started shifting. So I feel like what I'm going to bring today is how some of those shifts start affecting a more everyday experience. So right now, I recently got a job. I work with adolescent boys, age about 9 to almost 18. The primary ones I work with are 9 to 14. They're kids who aren't able to be in the foster care system because they have too many behavioral issues, they're too violent, it's too much for either their parents or foster parents to be able to handle. So I go there, I work anywhere from 8 to 16 hours a day where I'll be full-time with these kids. And there's 5 or 6 of them at a house. And so me and either 1 or 2 other employees will be with them the whole day. And there's a lot of good stuff, but also at times we'll have to do, like, put them in holds, have them on the ground, try to get them to calm down, stop fighting, stop being violent. And in those times, like, some of the things that will happen, and when I first started, it really shocked me. Some of these kids that'll seem, fine enough for some of the time, they start to go off, and it's not what you would see with a normal kid. They start swearing. I don't hear that level of profanity very much. So that kind of surprised me from boys who are not that old to hear that kind of language. Other stuff that happens, they'll turn and someone will try to spit in your face, and try to, like, bite you, different stuff like that. Let's see. So as this stuff's been happening, I start to, it's maybe just kind of how I am, but I start to think of what theology comes into play on how I think about what's going on and how I treat the kids. So another instance, and this one really got me thinking about theology. I went to tuck one of the kids in, and he had like a really bad day, just like pretty violent, pretty out of control, and he knew it. He knew that it wasn't, he hadn't done well that day. And so before bed, he asked me if he was bad. And, sorry, so, hearing that was just kind of hard because all the kid does, and my answer to him was that no, you're not bad, but sometimes you do bad things. So to me, it's a fundamental difference in how we understand the person. So I'll get into it a little later about the specifics of that theology. But another issue that I hear a lot is when they're acting up, when they're being violent. A lot of them will say, "I can't help it. I can't help it." It's and then that's followed with an excuse. An excuse is something like, "I have ADHD, so it's beyond my control," or "So-and-so said this to me. I can't help it that I go try to punch him." And so there's so many reasons, but fundamentally what they're trying to do is to escape their free will. To say, "I don't have it. I'm fated. There's something outside of me that's controlling me." So anyway, this, as I've been working on this presentation, I've been kind of thinking, what are some key theological issues that are coming into play here? And one that really came up was human nature, and how do we understand the person? So growing up, like in Protestant church, in the Western church in general, like something that's pretty prominent is that we are evil, and the goal of being Christian is to be saved from that evilness and to be made good. And Steve Long talked about this in one of the Raising Lazarus Wednesdays. He's talking about a distinction. Orthodoxy, that's not quite how we view it. It's not that we're evil and need to be made good, but that we're sick and we need healing. We need to be made whole. And it just kind of blew me away. And Father Tom talks a lot about how the church is like a hospital, a place of healing. And to me, it seems like a much more generous concept of the person. So how does this apply, to our day-to-day lives? Going back to that boy when he says, "Am I good? Am I bad?" I was thinking of how those two different views. How do we understand that situation in one view and then the other? The first view is that we're evil and need to be made good. The answer to that question, "Am I bad?" with yes, you are bad. You are evil, and then the goal becomes to destroy the person and replace that with the new person, with a new person in Christ. It's not a totally bad concept, but I think it gets a little misguided there, and there's a destruction of the person. In the other view, the Orthodox view, we're not looking to destroy the person. We're looking to scrape away the effects of sin and uncover the image of God. And this is where the idea of the image and likeness really comes in. In my grad school, which was a Marksville grad school, it's not tied to any denomination, but it's kind of more emergent church, I guess I'd say. But this whole discussion throughout my whole time there was, are we fundamentally good or are we fundamentally bad? And both, you hear on the more Calvinist side, which is we're totally depraved. And then on the other side, the more liberal Christian side, it's that we're not depraved, we're good, and that all evil, all sin is more systemic. It's outside of us. It's something in just how society works. To me, both of those views seem to really miss who we are. To me, we do sin. We do things that are bad. And to take that away and put it as something external just seems wrong. But at the same time, to say we're completely depraved also seems kind of off, because I see people do things that are good, and it seems that at our core that there is something that is good, that hasn't been lost. And so as I got into a lot more studying theology, I realized that a lot of this comes from not having the idea of the likeness of God. It's only the image. And so the reason this becomes such a polarizing issue in the Protestant church is that the fundamental question becomes, at the fall, did we lose the image or not? And so it's one or the other. In Orthodoxy, the image stays, but that doesn't mean we're perfect. It doesn't mean we're fully good. It's we still need to grow in the likeness, and that's the journey of faith, to grow in the likeness of God. So we're holding on that, yes, we are fundamentally good, but the effects of sin are still there. We haven't fully grown in the likeness of God. That's our task. I had a quote here from Vladimir Lossky. It says, "Evil entered into the world through the will. It is not a nature, but a condition." And I just like that idea that it's not fundamental to us, but it's a state that we come into in entering the world. And another quote from, sorry if I butchered the pronunciation, St. John of Kronstadt. "Never confuse a person formed in the image of God with the evil that is in him, because evil is but a chance misfortune, an illness, a devilish reverie. The very essence of the person is the image of God, and this remains in him despite every disfigurement." So, and then the second concept that really came to mind with me is free will. And this really in terms of hearing the kids say, "I can't because I have ADHD, I can't because of this." And that also got me thinking back to my internship, was working with those trying to recover from addiction. And I would hear that all the time from them, that they wanted to say, "I can't do this, I can't." A lot of them had legal issues, maybe for violence, and they wanted to say they couldn't control themselves, or they couldn't put up a resistance to the addiction because whatever, some external force. So yeah, this got me thinking of the creation account in Adam and Eve in the fall, and this is like the primary example of passing the buck somewhere else, trying to deny free will. So I'm just going to read that account and just listen to how Adam and Eve both immediately pass the burden to somewhere else. "Then the Lord God called to Adam and said to him, 'Where are you?' So he said, 'I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself.' And he said, 'Who told you that you were naked? You have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat?' Then the man said, 'The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the tree, and I ate.' The Lord said to the woman, 'What is this you have done?' The woman said, 'The serpent deceived me, and I ate.'" So what they're saying is, I don't have free will. What controls me is outside of me. Vladimir Lossky has a very, very good quote on that. I'll just read that. "St. Simeon, the new theologian, sees a progressive development of sin in the fact that man, instead of repenting, tries to justify himself before God. Adam declines all responsibility for Eve. 'The woman who thou gavest to be with me,' and so makes God the root cause of his fall." I'll read that again. Makes God the root cause of his fall. "Eve accuses the serpent in this refusal to recognize that the unique origin of evil is in their own free will. Men reject the possibility of freeing themselves from evil and submit their freedom to external necessity. The will hardens and shuts itself off from God." So I was thinking, reading Lossky, the right response, we might think that, that just means we need to try harder ourselves and own our free will. But he's getting into there's more than that. It's not just an ownership of the free will, but there's repentance. A repentance for having given it up and having not relied on God. Because the free will, and Father Crum talks a lot about this, that it's not just doing it on our own, but growing growing. He also gives the tree analogy. There's a certain place to grow and to grow in freedom, and that has to be in collaboration with God. So the other very next narrative of Genesis, it's the exact same situation. We're going with Cain and Abel. So we get in that narrative, we get that Cain is starting, the ideas of killing his brother are starting to come up. And so this is how God confronts him on it. So the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." So like his parents, Cain, at that, and we see throughout the rest that he wants to give it up. He wants to believe that he doesn't have control over it. And this is, I also saw a lot with those suffering from addiction. The ball gets rolling, the pattern gets going, and they want to shut down. And this is just fate. They have no control of it. So this ties into my favorite novel, actually, Steinbeck's East of Eden. So if you haven't read it, I'd recommend it. It's essentially a retelling of the creation story and specifically Cain and Abel. And one of my favorite parts about it was how it dealt with Cain. What came up a lot was the internal struggle that Cain had over this question: am I fundamentally evil? And do I have a choice? Do I have free will? So in this novel, there's a family servant who, great character, and goes to a Hebrew midrash over that passage I just read, and they're talking about the different possible translations and interpretations of. I'll go back to it real quick. Of that, that sin is at your door, but you should rule over it. Or another one you may have heard: you must rule over it. But Steinbeck offers another possibility, which is that you may rule over it, and that becomes a fundamental theme in the book, that God is giving back to Cain his freedom and giving him that choice. And in that saying to Cain that you're not fated, that freedom does exist. And in the book, that becomes just that. It essentially becomes salvation for Cain, because he has that choice. He's not totally depraved. He's not unable to make it. So how does this tie back into my work? The am I bad question. Just as Cain is internally struggling with, am I fated to be in opposition to God? This boy is looking at his own decisions, his own character, and saying, am I fated to be bad, to be evil? He during the day, he had interacted in ways with employees and others that it probably felt like that. Like maybe there's something fundamentally about me that is evil and beyond repair, beyond hope. And that when I told him that sometimes you do bad things, but you're not bad, the first time he didn't even hear it, because it was so ingrained in him that sense that he is beyond goodness, beyond the image of God. And so I had to repeat it to him, because he said, I said it to him that you're not bad, but you do bad things sometimes. And so there's a little more conversation, and then he says, so you think I'm bad? I said, is that what I just said to you? And he said, no. And I said, well, what did I say? And he kind of stumbled a bit, and so I repeated it. And I could see kind of the wheels turning and him thinking about that. But I think that's fundamental to remember: the image is not destroyed, that we are fundamentally good. This is a quote from Father James. I just got through his book, Surprised by Christ. Really good. The image of God is distorted by sin, but never destroyed. In the words of a hymn sung by Orthodox at a funeral service, I am the image of your inexpressible glory, even though I bear the wounds of sin. And because we still retain the image of God, we still retain free will, although sin restricts its scope. And the last sentence, that sin restricts its scope, I think that's a balance to free will. When we look at things like addiction, when we look at things like ADHD, and I actually told one of the kids that had used that as an excuse. I said, that is your challenge. That's something that is going to be more of a struggle for you than it is for others. I don't struggle with ADHD, so it's not, that regulation isn't a battle I have. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have control of it and I do. It means that that's his battle. I have other battles that restrict my freedom. But at the same time, God's calling us to push through those situations, and that's where we need to rely on God. So I wanted to end at this quote from Losky. It really, I think, kind of hits all categories I've been talking about. I probably wrote it 50 times. I just love it. God becomes powerless before human freedom. He cannot violate it since it flows from his omnipotence. Sorry. Certainly man was created by the will of God alone, but he cannot be deified by it alone. A single will for creation, but two for deification. A single will to raise up the image, but two to make the image into a likeness. The love of God for man is so great that it cannot constrain, for there is no love without respect. Divine will always will submit itself to gropings, to detours, even to revolts of human will, to bring it to free consent. Of such is divine providence, and the classic image of the pedagogue must seem feeble indeed to anyone who has felt God as a beggar of love, waiting at the soul's door without ever daring to force it.
One more time.
Yeah, it's... Okay, I'll go ahead. God becomes powerless before human freedom. He cannot violate it since it flows from his omnipotence. Certainly man was created by the will of God alone, but he cannot be deified by it alone. A single will for creation, but two for deification. A single will to raise up the image, but two to make the image into a likeness. The love of God for man is so great that it cannot constrain, for there is no love without respect. Divine will always will submit itself to gropings, to detours, even to revolts of human will, to bring it to free consent. Of such is divine providence, and the classic image of the pedagogue must seem feeble indeed to anyone who has felt God as a beggar of love, waiting at the soul's door without ever daring to force it. I just love that image of a beggar of love, and him saying that the image of the pedagogue seems so feeble in comparison. And I think that's what I felt, is that when we talk about God's sovereignty, and when that comes, a lot of times in theology that bumps up against freedom. But I think in our experience we recognize that this God that's so powerful and so tough that he overrides our freedom, in the end seems fairly small in our experience. But this God who doesn't blast the door open, who just stands there and knocks and even begs, experientially it's a much grander God. It's a much more sovereign God that we're dealing with. So, you want to go into questions or comments or thoughts?
So Scott, in your counseling these kids, do you have the freedom to talk about God with them, or is there any sort of ability to open that little door to let them know that they're loved by a bigger God that wants them to see their goodness? I'm
still fairly new, so I'm still feeling that out a bit.
Yeah.
I think there is some, like last night I had a kid start talking about his experience of church, and so, and there's, I think it starts to come up, and I'm looking for when that comes up and how they're understanding those things. So, yeah, I feel like I'm in the feeling out stages of that, but I feel like there could be a lot there. So.
Do they go to school?
Yeah. They go to school, but it's like pretty short days. It kind of ranges. Most of them, they all go to at least some school, but some of it's kind of.
But I'd like for us, because we can ask these factual stuff, I'd like to ask what his words did to your hearts. If we can go there for a second. What touched you, or what maybe got your soul considering?
Well, I was brought to tears. I'm trying not to cry, but it was very poetic and personal.
Which part?
I guess the part that got me is that to really see that this interaction between God's love and our free will in a clearer fashion, so that you see how we sort of have to collaborate in order to attain beautification.
Anyone else, what touched you?
I was glad that, I don't know the Old Testament. In fact, I have to admit that I have never read the Old Testament from beginning to end. There's books that I've read, and I've never heard in Genesis where God says you're not depraved. You've got another chance. It's up to you. I knew I've read the parts. Sin is crouching at your door. You must master it. But I didn't take that into saying that we as people, even at the fall, even with our tendency to want pleasure rather than self-denial, it's always, even after you're thrown out of the Garden of Eden, it's always our choice at every moment, even though things seem like somebody's forcing you to do this, or like St. Paul said, I don't do what I want to do, I do like the body of death that he carries. I don't know if I'm saying it right. You want to correct that?
I don't do things I want to do, I do things I don't want to do.
Yeah. So, like Father Tom Huck a long time ago said, the fight is what God wants from us, a good and honest battle. The victory comes from Him. And I forget that He wants a good and honest fight from us. And because I know salvation is from the Lord, so I figure, oh, well, if I'm being saved, then I don't have to worry. You know? Why should I try? So that was good. Thank you.
Yeah, that kind of struck me that when I was reading about Cain, and that comes after the fall, and that God's not saying, He doesn't say something along the lines of just totally give yourself over to me because you can't do anything.
Right.
There's not this complete wiping away, and in Orthodox they talk about almost a synergy, that our works are coming the same time as God's grace, but God's grace is what's empowering. But I just love that He doesn't, when He speaks to Cain, He puts it back on him. And so even though it's coming out of God's grace, the call is still to Cain. So, yeah.
I was more struck by the really vastness of God's love for us and our misunderstanding of His love, our interpretation of His love for us based on what pleases us or not. And yes, maybe we are giving up our freedom, but I would say we go even a step further to misuse our freedom. When we blame others, we are misusing our freedom. So if we can understand that we are actually active in misusing it, not only active in separating ourselves from God. So we give it up to the good cause if you want, but we keep it for the not so very good one.
Yeah, the pursuit of our annihilation, which is kind of where sin leads
so
us.
we're using our free will to annihilation.
Yeah.
I'm stirred by your ministry there, and it is clear to me, and based on what you said with the two anecdotes of your time in the trenches there, I'm stirred by the fact that, like you, we're all supposed to be stirring something, making something possible to be stirred in someone else. And I'm struck by that because you can't, just like I think the effect of your talk today, you can't fake authenticity. And that there are two things that I saw that are very stirring. The first is that young man took the risk to ask you if he was bad. That's huge. That says everything about you, I believe. The second thing that he did is he stood there to listen even when he couldn't hear you.
Trust.
And, God bless you, because I sure hope that when I have an interaction with somebody, that God helps me to do the same thing.
And what's that?
To lead them with a way to have some kind of hope or make a change themselves. To lead them a way to do it. He may never hear you, or he might. Either way, someone came along and said, but I don't believe that.
Yeah, in my last year of school, we had a case conference where we discussed different, people we were working with, and the professor said something that really struck me. It kind of gets to what you're saying. One of the other students had brought a case, and the professor said, "I would have said something like this," and she kind of went through, and there were a couple comments from the other students that was, "Well, this is a kid. Like they wouldn't hear. This would just go right over their head." And her response was, "I know." And she said, "It's not. We're not always looking for on the conscious level at that moment that it sticks, but yeah, like they're gonna later on that door's gonna be open. You're giving it."
I don't think very many people know this about me, but I was in foster care, and so when you were talking, I was thinking about when you're a kid and you've been in a really bad place, it's really hard to hear any hope or love. And I just really appreciate your efforts there, and the fact that somebody did trust and risk. And I think that we all are disciples to others, and opening ourselves up to see sometimes the ugly things that we see in others is important, because sometimes that's the very thing that we need to just love somebody through and give them the opportunity to change and be something different than what their experiences have been. And so I really appreciate that, one, he trusted you, but two, that you were there and you were fully, your heart was there. Because it's really easy to say, like you said with your professor, to say the big lofty things, and it's important that maybe at some point they'll remember that and come back to it. But being present at that moment when somebody's really hurting and struggling is incredibly powerful, and you have the ability to really change somebody's life, really change it. So I'm getting all the theology parts of this, but what I'm getting from you more than that is just your heart and how present you were with that. And I'm going to pray for you that you continue to have that, because one of the hardest things you'll find is that it will pull you apart at times. So we need to pray for him. Yes. And thank you.
Unfortunately, I missed the beginning when I was in the kitchen, and I caught this part. And what you were sharing, how we need to be really present with everybody and listen and love them into the likeness of God, rather you know, to put up with these things and to wait on how they develop, and that there's hope. And because I was a lost one into my mid-40s, when a friend of mine came, we were talking, and she was telling about her son who had ADHD and how life was so difficult for them as a family. And I didn't know what she was talking about. I'd never heard of it. And I said, what are you talking about? What is this thing? So it's some disease or something? And she said, well, it's you. And I said, well, what am I? She said, well, you're a textbook case of ADHD. So she went through the list. And I said to her, you mean I'm not bad? And I was in my mid-40s, and I was tormented my entire life with feeling like I was always bad, because I was always in trouble. But I didn't feel bad. I didn't think I was doing mean things, but nobody ever guided me and walked me through, loved me through, even though I knew the Word of God and I knew the Scriptures, but it wasn't, you know, nothing connected with, because of who I was, and I was in trouble all the time. And because she loved me enough to say it with compassion and how to work through it, it's just like let a bird out of a cage, you know. So the little kids can be bigger and bigger and still miss. So we just have to keep beside them all the way through to the end.
I guess one thing that struck me too is that when you take the view that the person has it is the picture with something over it that's obscuring their likeness to God, is that you don't get embittered against them when they do bad because you don't think they're evil. Because having dealt with kids who are get out of control and destroy things and whatnot, it's easy to be caught up in the moment and think these kids are really bad and I'm dealing with some kind of a maniac or something. And in reality, it's you know, you have that peaceful image within your heart that conveys strength to them. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think
is that when you approach them in peace, rather than that war, they react in peace rather than fighting against you.
At least the odds are better.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I think when you come with that openness, like it always struck me as kind of humorous, but also sad that they're reading like older, you know, quite a bit older psychiatry and psychology books. A lot of times, like mental illness was referred to as just like insanity, or you know, just in terms that to me, like when I read it, it felt like that what they would do is label, okay, something's wrong with this person, we can't understand it. Let's throw them in a, you know, insane asylum. And there's just this distancing that I feel reading some of that literature. And I feel a similar thing that when we label someone as evil, or when we just, you know, we're pushing away in that, we can't come with compassion or caring when we come with that. And, you know, because I get that some at work, that some people, I can see that battle in them, that sometimes they want to just say, I hate these kids, they're evil, you know, because they're, I mean, when a kid's, you know, one woman had, you know, a kid break his arm over her head. Like, you know, it's not enjoyable. Lost my train of thought now. But I see, I think that when we stop pushing them away and start to look in, you know, you look at, like in this situation, most of them have been sexually abused. You know, most of them have been physically abused. Most of them have been neglected. You know, that's like, when you start getting into that, like, it makes sense. Like, of course, you know, they're not going to be perfect. So, yeah.
Any other places where you guys went? Janelle?
Yeah, I'm still stuck on that, what you were talking about with Cain, about God gave us a warning. I'd always read that passage to mean that it was God telling him he needs to do a meat sacrifice like Abel did. But this is just, but but I see that now, it's like, aha, I see it, I understand, that it's God giving a warning, and also thinking about how when we do get out there and do our thing, when God brings us back, it's like, or at least He's calling out to us, whether we come back or not, is our own choice, our own free will. It's like what Father Radin was talking about in his sermon about where he talked about the gospel reading about the man in the gatherings and the people telling Jesus to go away. And it's just like, do we do that? When God calls after us, do we tell Him to go away? When He warns us, do we tell Him to go away? And just to listen. Listen.
Yeah, I noticed one part that I didn't really read before. There we go. Where he says, God says, if you do well, will it not be accepted? And it kind of, that it's not. I think I had read it a lot like that in the past too. That it's like, just do the right thing.
Yeah.
But it's more like you can be accepted, but your heart's not in the right place. And it's more calling than just saying, like, oh, do this. Yeah.
And I also, another thing was that what made me wonder too, made me think about, was the prodigal son, was that really a real thing? Was the prodigal son one of those people that were tending pigs that came to Jesus and were talking to him? Was he one of them? And then after that, that just made me think, did he answer that call?
One more thought. You ever think of God as a beggar? Did that touch anyone?
Yeah, it did. And I think that image is going to stay with me for a long time. God at the door of our soul begging.
The creator of the universe begging. What did you say? What's that word? Was the last sentence? Begging at the soul, knocking at the soul. Waiting at the soul's door. Waiting at your door of your soul, never daring to force it open. We have a God who's a beggar. And oh, how He's dying to have you. And the interesting thing when you look at, Scott did a beautiful thing. Two questions he asked: are we bad? And our free will. And the resurrection icon, when we look at it next time, the doors are open. The chains are broken. The locks are done. You've got to walk out. And the church is inviting you to walk out in such a beautiful way. But again, like you were saying, the will, I want to do it my way, create a designer of faith. So I want to thank you, Scott, for speaking from your heart. Thank you for doing the work. Thank you for being in our parish with your lovely wife. Julie's going to speak next month on some of her story and contributions, receiving grace and love and light. This ends the series of Raising Lazarus. Next 3 times will start June. November 6th. It's going to be a tough journey for the next 3 oases. We're going to talk about God living in the pain and suffering. We're going to have Leanna Bevoino speak to us about how she's preparing for her death. Not a fun subject, but her cell counts have gone up and we don't know when she's going to die, but she's preparing for her death. She looks beautiful. When you see her, you think, are you kidding me? Let's go to a fashion show. And yet, on the inside, she's not doing well. But her soul is very intact. So I've asked her to do a very difficult thing, and I want you to respect her by showing up. I don't know how long she's going to be alive. And we have some visitors from Romania coming, so we're trying to figure out how to balance both things. But I've asked her to speak on the 6th. And I hope she can be here on the 6th.
Oh, yeah.
And she's been preparing for this because she loves us all. It's easier for her to go to Church of Assumption. But her story is very powerful. We need to hear her story. We need to be inspired by her story. The next week is going to be Jillian Chandler. She's the secretary of Assumption. She goes to our parish. She's broke her ankle and ruined her knee. She's going to be talking about finding the power of God's love in her father's death. You cannot miss that time. It's a powerful story of just how things you go to expecting to be helping your father for the first leg of, she has 4 siblings, I think. She went the first leg because she expected the dad to live for another month. And the story when she got there, she was the one who had to bear the intense, enormous, she loves her father. So don't miss them. Ask your friends to come, because there's something about sitting in the pain and sitting with this kid that wants, how do you sit with God's grace to respond out of love? And then the following week, Julie's going to talk about her experience. Maybe not in suffering. Was that right?
Can you read the quote one more time, just so we can
All right,
remember
we'll finish that. You have it? Can you send it to me? Yeah. What I'll do is he'll send it to me. He'll read it before he closes the prayer, and I'll send it to the update tomorrow. Okay?
It was, let me check it. The Mystical Theology of Orthodox, or the Eastern Church. Yeah.
It's a pretty hard book to read, so
Yeah.
thank God he picked
One of the few things we can get. Yeah. It feels pretty heady, but he really does get to the heart. But it is a lot to get through.
I hope you will come back in a few months and share your journey
With kids.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
I think that might be a nice 5-part oasis, is having people in the healing ministries, their journey of how God. I like that. Thank you for that.
Great, you're doing a wonderful God's work. You really are. Some of us were raised in, I was raised in my parents were all Greek immigrants, and we were raised in such a, you can empathize, President, our father too. We were raised in such a cloistered, closed little world of love and happiness and wonderful things.
Yes.
And I was in the 8th grade, and I went to school one day, and my best friend came, and she had welts on her arms and her legs. I said, Shirley, what happened? She said, my dad beat me. I had never heard of a father hurting a child. And the school principal said to her, I want your dad to come and see me tomorrow about this child abuse. I went home and told my dad. He said to me, no, you're wrong. No parent can possibly hurt their own child. That was unknown to an immigrant. You love, he said, your children. You cherish them. They're gifts from God. But that was my first encounter, and my dad's first encounter with child abuse. And when you talked about that little boy that said to you, no, I'm bad. See, I couldn't wrap my mind around any child thinking it was bad. But that's the world we were raised in. So you're doing a wonderful God's work.
We'll read that and we'll close.
God becomes powerless before human freedom. He cannot violate it since it flows from his omnipotence. Certainly man was created by the will of God alone, but he cannot be deified by it alone. A single will for creation, but 2 for deification. A single will to raise up the image, but 2 to make the image into a likeness. The love of God for man is so great that it cannot constrain, for there is no love without respect. The divine will always will submit itself to gropings, to detours, even to revolts of human will, to bring it to a free consent. Of such is divine providence, and the classical image of the pedagogue must seem feeble indeed to anyone who has felt God as a beggar of love, waiting at the soul's door without ever daring to force it.
That's beautiful.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, as we come before you in humility, you, the creator of the universe, being humble, ever so humble, to take on our human flesh. May we become humble, that we may open the door to our soul, inviting you, not the beggar, but the beggar. Inviting you, the creator of the universe, to guide us, to enlighten us, and to lead us out of our stench, out of our brokenness, and into healing, into wholeness, into love. This we ask in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Thank you, Son.
Thank you.